today's video, we are going to rank every NBA team's 2025 offseason. But before we get into it, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I'm a small channel just trying to grow. Let's get right into it. By the way, we're excluding the draft just so the video isn't longer than it already is. We're talking just signings and trades. So we are going to rank these teams offseason based by these categories. W offseason, pretty good, mid, I guess, and some question marks. I'm sure you get the gist. Let's just get right into it, starting with the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder kept their offseason pretty much all in-house. Their main moves were giving Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the league MVP, a contract extension, also extended both young stars in Chet Holmgren and J-Dub, brought back promising young point guard AJ Mitchell on a 3-year deal, and kept Jalen Williams, their backup center, the face of NBA Twitter. He's staying in OKC. While obviously the Thunder did not make any splash trades, they didn't make any splash signings, they kept everything internal, retained their best players on long-term deals, which was absolutely the move. You have the championship formula. Now it's just time to perfect it with these guys on your team for the next 5 years. So I'm going to give the Thunder a W offseason. They didn't have to do much, but they did what was needed. They were patient with their roster, and it eventually paid off with an NBA championship, and they're going to continue to follow that formula and maybe even repeat next season. It's very much possible. Now for the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm going to place them in the mid offseason. The Timberwolves lost one of their better perimeter defenders and three-point shooters in Nickeil Alexander-Walker in free agency to the Atlanta Hawks, but with the rise of Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark, two promising young two guards, I think they can replace Nickeil Alexander-Walker just fine. They have not made any additions in this offseason, but they did bring back Naz Reid on a 5-year contract and Julius Randle on a 3-year contract. And Joe Ingles, I guess he's still an NBA player. I don't think anybody was sweating it for the Wolves in this offseason if they lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but Naz Reid was the prize, and there were definitely interested teams in free agency. He was one of the better players on the market, but the Timberwolves managed to bring him back on a long-term deal, so that's a W. But did the team necessarily get better? Not really. Did it get much worse? Not really. So it's a mid-off season. The New York Knicks, I'm gonna give them a pretty good offseason. They brought in Jordan Clarkson, who can solidify the backup point guard spot, also bringing in Gershon Yabusele on a 2-year contract, and hopefully they will bring some consistency off the bench for the New York Knicks, who desperately need it. To get a guy like Jordan Clarkson, who you're comfortable with playing 15 minutes a night on a minimum contract, is a steal. And Gershon Yabusele, who's a good defender and reliable three-point shooter, you brought in for only $12 million. The Knicks also extended Mikal Bridges for another 3 years, and the Knicks will look to be a force in the Eastern Conference yet again. I think their free agent additions are going to be huge for them, and this team might be in conversation for best in the East. The Denver Nuggets, I'm going to give them a W offseason. The Denver Nuggets traded Michael Porter Jr. and a first-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Cameron Johnson, and traded Dario Saric for Jonas Valanciunas, along with picking up Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. in free agency. Flawless offseason for the Denver Nuggets. You bring in defense, you bring in scoring, you bring in depth, and probably the first reliable backup center for Jokic since he's become a superstar in the NBA. I love the reunion with Bruce Brown. Obviously, he played the best basketball of his career during that Denver Nuggets 2023 championship run. And with the Denver Nuggets struggling at times last season with their three-point shooting, you bring in Tim Hardaway Jr., who was one of the best three-point shooters available in free agency. So I have to give them a W. I think this offseason firmly puts the Denver Nuggets back in championship talks. They did great, and they should at least be a top 3 seed in the West. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm gonna give them a mid offseason. I don't think the Cavs did bad necessarily, but they didn't do anything that makes me feel any more confident in their championship chances. The addition of Lonzo Ball could be huge for them. You let go of Isaac Okoro, who is one of your better perimeter defenders, in hopes that he can make a full recovery and maybe even turn the clock back to 2020, where he was a great perimeter defender and lethal from 3. But with Lonzo Ball's health status being very questionable, I can't say that I can fully rely on him to become that this season. I don't even know if I can rely on Lonzo to play 45 games. And with the loss of Ty Jerome to the Memphis Grizzlies in free agency, they are going to need a healthy Lonzo year. They also brought back Sam Merrill on a 4-year contract extension. He was a good three-point shooter for them. And the addition of Larry Nance Jr., who I will say is a much more capable backup center option than Tristan Thompson, who they had playing minutes in 2025. So they definitely upgraded at that spot. I will give them that. But nothing they did in this offseason makes me feel any better or worse about their chances at a championship, so I'm going to keep them in mid. The Detroit Pistons, I am going to give a pretty good offseason. The Pistons began the offseason by re-signing Paul Reed to a 2-year deal. I think this was a good move. He's a reliable, solid backup center. In free agency, they added Karis LeVert on a 2-year deal. He's likely the replacement for Dennis Schroeder, who left for the Sacramento Kings, and brought in Duncan Robinson on a 3-year deal after it was exposed that Malik Beasley allegedly was gambling on NBA games, which he was cleared of, but unfortunately the damage was already done, and the Pistons brought in Duncan Robinson ideally to be the Malik Beasley replacement. But with Malik Beasley being, of course, innocent and still a free agent, it is all the more likely that he comes back to the Pistons, and this is viewed as a W offseason. If that does happen, I would have to bump this up a tier. But in this offseason, they lost Simone Fontecchio, who wasn't very good for them anyway, so who really cares? And Tim Hardaway Jr., who was actually quite productive for them, one of their better three-point shooters. He is now gone, and Dennis Schroeder obviously is now a Sacramento King. But with the position that the Pistons were placed in this offseason, I think they made upgrades to the roster. Karis LeVert will be a nice shot creator off the bench in the non-Cade minutes, and Duncan Robinson is still one of the best movement shooters in the NBA. They didn't get significantly better or make a splash trade by any means, but they did what they could with what they had, and I don't mind it. Now for the Houston Rockets, this might be the easiest W of this video so far. Absolutely phenomenal offseason from the Houston Rockets. You traded Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, and a top 10 pick for NBA superstar and legend Kevin Durant, one of the greatest offensive players we have seen in NBA history, is now a member of the Houston Rockets, who were in desperate need for shot creation and just offense in general. Needless to say, a great move from the Houston Rockets. This trade firmly puts them in championship conversations, adding Kevin Durant, one of the best players in the world and still one of the most efficient scorers in the NBA, alongside a young star big man in Alperen Şengün. With the incredible defense that won them 52 games last year, this team is going to be a force to reckon with in the Western Conference. They also extended their number 3 overall pick in Jabari Smith Jr. for another 5 years. He has the potential to be an elite player, so that's good getting him under contract for the next half decade. They also brought back 2 key players in Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams on manageable deals. And in free agency, they added Clint Capella on a 3-year deal, who will start off the season as center number 3, but if another team gets desperate at the deadline and needs some big man help, you could look to trade him and get some assets back, or you could just keep him as insurance in case one of Steven Adams or Şengün go down. They also brought in Dorian Finney-Smith, one of the better 3-and-D options in free agency, on a 4-year deal. This team is loaded with talent and depth, and with one of the best coaches in the NBA in Ime Udoka, the Houston Rockets should remain as one of the highest seeds in the Western Conference, and I think they actually got much better in this offseason, so I'm going to give them a W. The Orlando Magic, another team I'm going to have to give a W offseason. The Orlando Magic waited no time in this offseason and pulled off one of the bigger blockbuster moves of the year in trading for Desmond Bane, who can provide a scoring punch and 3-point shooting to a lineup that desperately needs it. They also brought back Mo Wagner on a 1-year deal. They need all the center depth that they can get, and he's a solid stretch big who you only brought back for $5 million, good price. And Tyus Jones, who can come off the bench and play make. Again, for a team that desperately needs it, this Orlando Magic team has been one of the worst offensive units over the last 5 years, so I have to give them a W. They addressed their biggest needs in this offseason, and I think Desmond Bane is a perfect fit in that starting lineup. For the Dallas Mavericks, I am going to give them a mid offseason. Again, we're not counting the draft, so Cooper Flag has nothing to do with this, or else they'd be a W. But the only addition they made in this free agency period so far was D'Angelo Russell on a 2-year deal, who is going to fill in for Kyrie Irving, who unfortunately went down last season with a season-ending injury, and we don't know when he will be back, so D'Angelo Russell can fill his shoes. You also have the reunion with AD. There should be some chemistry there. A pretty good signing for them if he isn't the player that he was last season for the Nets, one of the most inefficient players in the league. He was terrible for the Nets, but if he can be who he's generally been over the last 3 to 5 years, I think the Mavericks will be just fine, and this will be a good signing. They also extended Kyrie Irving for another 3 years and PJ Washington for another 4 years, and the only player they lost was Spencer Dinwiddie, and unfortunately that is a huge loss. They can no longer make the playoffs now without Spencer Dinwiddie. Now I'm trolling, but I'm gonna have to put them in mid. They didn't have a ton of cap space to work with, and their roster was already pretty much loaded, so they didn't need to do much, but they got D'Lo, and I'd say D'Lo's about the most mid player maybe ever, so they're gonna be with the Cavaliers and Wolves in mid. The LA Clippers, I'm going to give a pretty good offseason. The Clippers brought back James Harden and Nicholas Batum on 2-year extensions. Good moves there, although Nicholas Batum is 40 years old. He can still play some meaningful minutes, and James Harden's still an all-star in the league, so he gets a 2-year extension. But one of the biggest stories of the offseason was Bradley Beal's buyout from the Phoenix Suns, in which he then landed on the Los Angeles Clippers with a 2-year deal. Now, Bradley Beal has become one of the most hated players in the NBA because he was on one of the biggest contracts in the league with a no-trade clause. So he basically held the Phoenix Suns hostage until they eventually waived him, him, but Bradley Beal, a guy who last season averaged 17 points per game, shooting 50% from the field, no matter how which way you slice it and dice it or whatever you have to say about Bradley Beal or the Clippers, $5 million a year for Bradley Beal is still a good, that's a good deal. That's a great deal. I don't think the Clippers could have asked for a better Norman Powell replacement in free agency than Bradley Beal. And speaking of Norman Powell, who was one of the Clippers' most productive players offensively last year, was traded in exchange for John Collins. I think John Collins was a great addition for this Clippers team who desperately needed a power forward. Sure, Kawhi can play the 4, but do you want one of the most injury-riddled superstars in NBA history to play the 4 when that's not his natural position? Probably not. So Kawhi moves back to the 3, and the additions of Chris Paul and Brook Lopez in free agency. Chris Paul should continue to be one of the better backup point guards in the league, and a backup center for Ivica Zubac was definitely needed. Brook Lopez fills that hole. He can block shots and shoot threes. The only thing keeping this Clippers offseason from a W for me is just simply the age. This is the oldest roster in the NBA, and you surround these guys around Kawhi Leonard, one of the most unavailable superstars in the NBA. That might not be a great combination. And while I do think the Clippers can win a playoff series or two, I don't think there's really any likelihood that the Clippers are representing the Western Conference in the NBA Finals, unfortunately. I don't think we get to that point with this team, so I'm going to keep them in the pretty good tier. The Los Angeles Lakers, I'm going to put them in the mid offseason tier. In this offseason, the Lakers have not made a single trade. Literally not one. But in free agency, they have added DeAndre Ayton, Jake LaRavia, and Marcus Smart. Now, do I think these are solid signings? Sure. I think Jake LaRavia can play 15 minutes a night and be quite productive. Ideally, he can shoot the 3 efficiently and play some okay defense, which I think he can do, but you bring him in to replace Dorian Finney-Smith, who he's not better than, at least not defensively, definitely not defensively. And DeAndre Ayton on a 2-year, $18 million deal, I think this was an A+ signing. DeAndre Ayton was one of the better available centers in free agency, and you bring him in, that's a good job. But for this Lakers team that allowed Rudy Gobert to drop 25 points in a playoff game last year, is DeAndre Ayton the paint defender, the inside presence that this team needs? Probably not. I would like a center that's a little bit more defensively capable. I mean, you got Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves starting in the backcourt. That's going to be horrid defensively. If somebody blows past Luka, are they really going to be scared of DeAndre Ayton to contest their shot down low? Probably not. All I'm saying is I think the Lakers should make a trade for another center. I think DeAndre Ayton is good, but I'm not in love with the fit with the Lakers. And Marcus Smart hasn't even been good or available to play over the last 2 years. You bring in a 31-year-old point guard who's clearly lost a step and isn't the defender that he used to be the best perimeter defender for your team. I don't love it. So with all these moves adding up, I think the Lakers can convince themselves they're an okay team with these moves, but I think it's pretty obvious to everyone else that this team definitely has some work to do. The Miami Heat, I'm gonna give an I guess offseason to. Their big move of the offseason was trading for Norman Powell, who had an all-star caliber year with the Clippers last year. They also added Simone Fontecchio and brought back Davion Mitchell. I guess, like, this tier might literally just be made for the Miami Heat. You're no closer to a championship than you previously were before. You haven't made any big decisions one way or the other. This team kind of feels like they're stuck in purgatory, which is like the worst position to be in for an NBA team. I think they're a trade or two away from being like a scary team in the East, but I think best case scenario for this Miami Heat team is losing in the first round. So they're an I guess. The Atlanta Hawks, another W offseason team. You traded practically pennies for Kristaps Porzingis, who's like the perfect fit for Trae Young, a guy who can block shots and make his threes efficiently as a big man. I think that was a great move. They also brought in Nickeil Alexander-Walker in free agency. He is a great fit next to Trae Young, a scrappy perimeter defender who can shoot his threes efficiently, along with adding another 2-guard in free agency in Luke Kennard, one of the NBA's best 3-point shooters. So for a team last season who pretty much relied on Trae and Trae Young only for their offense, their offseason has given them such an offensive and spacing boost. We all love Dyson Daniels, one of the best defenders in the NBA, but we can acknowledge that he is not a reliable 3-point shooter, and Zachary Risache is only in his second season, so I'm sure they don't want to rely on him to be a good 3-point shooter already. So you bring in 3 guys who can knock down the 3. I think the Hawks did amazing. They had one of the better off seasons of all these teams, and I'm excited to see how well they do in the East with this new roster next season. So they get a W. The Golden State Warriors, question mark. Well, the Warriors have done nothing, like not one thing. Actually, they did do one thing. They let Kevon Looney walk to the Pelicans, and now their most consistent big man is gone. I guess they're still waiting on the Kuminga thing. Al Horford's supposed to be on this team, but he hasn't been announced yet. There's just no way to defend this, bro. We're about to be halfway into September and you haven't done anything. The Milwaukee Bucks, I am gonna put in the mid category. This one's difficult, okay? So they bring in Miles Turner on a 4-year deal. The best possible Brook Lopez replacement you could have asked for. Well, he's actually a much bigger upgrade over Brook Lopez, but they're still, I guess, kind of the same archetype. But in order to have the money to sign Miles Turner, the Bucks had to waive star point guard Damian Lillard, who they will be paying out $113 million to over the next 5 years to not even play for them. In free agency, the Bucks re-signed Kevin Porter Jr., Bobby Portis, Taurean Prince, Ryan Rollins, and Gary Trent Jr. So they're pretty much running this team back, plus Miles Turner and Cole Anthony. I mean, I don't know. Like, Miles Turner's gonna be good for them. I think he's a perfect fit next to Giannis, but your third best player is Kyle Kuzma. This roster is going nowhere. This team is not gonna compete for a championship, and it feels like this offseason is just delaying the inevitable Giannis trade. So it's hard for me to give them a better ranking than mid, just because they're pretty much still in the same situation that they were in last year, a mediocre team in the weak Eastern Conference. But for having really no draft picks or cap space, I suppose they did fairly well. The Indiana Pacers, I'm gonna put in the question marks category. Like I mentioned, Miles Turner did depart from the Indiana Pacers to the Milwaukee Bucks. That's a brutal hit for this team. It's extremely hard to find a guy like Miles Turner. To see a rare talent like that walk, it does hurt. So obviously that left a big hole at the center spot. So what do the Pacers do? They go out and re-sign James Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson and made a trade for Jay Huff. Now listen, I like Isaiah Jackson. I think he is a solid big man off the bench, but he's not great, and he's also coming off a season-ending injury. It might take him some time to get back into the groove of things. James Wiseman, a former number 2 overall pick, just hasn't worked out in the league. He has zero defensive instincts, and he's not really a good offensive player either. And Jay Huff was somewhat productive for the Grizzlies, but ideally he's not a starting center for any NBA team. So the Pacers are running it back next season with the same roster pretty much, minus Tyrese Halliburton to injury, and obviously minus Miles Turner. So I'm gonna have to give them some question marks. So not a great offseason from the Pacers, but I do expect them to still be pretty competitive in the Eastern Conference. The San Antonio Spurs, I'm gonna give a mid offseason. They inked De'Aaron Fox to a major 5-year contract extension. Now there have been conversations on whether this was an overpay or not. I don't really care. De'Aaron Fox is still a star point guard, and I feel like people are forgetting that, but that wasn't the only questionable contract they handed out this summer. They added free agent big man Luke Cornett on a 4-year, $42 million deal. Luke Cornett has been the backup 5 over in Boston for the last few years now. He's a huge body who can block some shots and actually shoot from 3. Was he worth a 4-year deal? Maybe not, but for a young Spurs team looking to break through in the Western Conference and make their first playoff appearance with Victor Wembanyama, you're gonna need a reliable backup center, and Luke Cornett can definitely be that for you. Speaking of backup center, they also added Kelly Olynyk. I don't know how much he has left in the tank, but he can still grab some rebounds and shoot 3s. So that could be a good addition for them, but outside of that, not much else besides losing Chris Paul, and I think they'll be fine without him. So I'll give the Spurs mid for now. The Boston Celtics, we are gonna put you right there with the Pacers and the Warriors at question mark. With the Jason Tatum injury, the Celtics know this year is a wash, so they got off Drew Holiday's big contract while he still had value and traded Kristaps Porzingis, which effectively means this is no longer a luxury tax team. But the return for these guys wasn't great. You basically got an undrafted player in RJ Lewis Jr. out of Kristaps Porzingis and Anthony Simon's expiring contract out of Drew Holiday. So the Celtics are wiping their cap sheet and looking forward to the future, which is the right move. Their center rotation is Luka Garza and Neemias Queta. Enough said, question marks. Now for the Toronto Raptors, I'm gonna give them an I guess, right next to the Heat. In this offseason, the Raptors have re-signed Jakob Poeltl to a 4-year contract extension. They also re-signed 57-year-old Garrett Temple and brought in Sandro Mamu on a 2-year deal, a free agent big to replace Chris Boucher, who left for the Boston Celtics. I'm assuming you understand why they're an I guess. The Chicago Bulls, I'm just doing a number on the I guess tier. The Bulls started off their offseason by trading Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro. The Bulls have a crowded guard room as is. They didn't really need Lonzo Ball's services anymore. So you trade him to the Cavs, who needed a backup point guard, and you get Isaac Okoro in return. Arguably was the best perimeter defender on that Cavs team. And the only reason his stint didn't really work out with the Cavs was just his shooting and offense in general. Overall, I guess I like this move from the Bulls. Isaac Okoro could maybe be something for you. The Bulls also brought back Trey Jones and Josh Giddey on contract extensions. The Giddey extension was just announced yesterday. It's a 4-year, $100 million deal. I think that's a pretty good deal. $25 million a year for Josh Giddey is not a bad price at all. But as far as the direction for this team's future and next season in general, there's there's just not too much to be excited about for the Bulls, and their entire offseason basically was just one trade, so they didn't do much, so I'm gonna have to give them the I guess. The Charlotte Hornets, I'm gonna put them in the mid tier. The best thing the Hornets have done so far was trading Yusuf Nurkic, who's completely unplayable at this point in his career, for Colin Sexton. Colin Sexton last year averaged 18 points per game, 4 assists, and shot 40% from 3. That's a huge pickup for the Hornets, and especially with LaMelo constantly dealing with injuries, it's nice to have an insurance at the backup point guard spot in Colin Sexton. And more insurance in re-signing Trey Mann to a 3-year deal. We didn't get to see much of him last season due to injury, but I'm expecting a bounce-back season from him. The only thing keeping this from a good offseason, in my opinion, was not addressing the center spot or defense in general. They were one of the worst defenses in the league last year, and their starting center is Mason Plumlee in 2025. Enough said, I can't put you in a good tier for that. The 76ers are the newest member of the I guess tier. Now, this team has made no trades yet, but they did lose Gershon Yabusele to the Knicks in free agency. He was one of their more reliable role players off the bench, so that's gonna hurt. But they also brought in his replacement in free agency in Trendon Watford, who showed some promise last year for the Brooklyn Nets. I would expect him to get a good amount of burn this season with the Sixers, given that they are lacking size in general. I also like the re-signing of Justin Edwards. He's a younger guy that showed promise for this team last year. That's a good move. But where I really scratch my head with this team is the re-signing of Eric Gordon and Kyle Lowry. Both of these guys are so miserably washed, and they were so bad for you last year. Why bring them back? Is it for their veteran presence or their leadership? Dude, this team was a dumpster fire last season with them on the team. They didn't do shit for that. So yeah, not a bad offseason from the Sixers. I think those were some questionable moves to say the least, but they didn't get much better or much worse in my opinion, so it's an I guess. The Brooklyn Nets, I am going to give a mid 2025 offseason. Their big move was trading Cameron Johnson to the Denver Nuggets in exchange for Michael Porter Jr. and a first-round pick. Many people might not like this trade, but we got to remember, MPJ is still a productive player, still one of the best shooters in the NBA, a solid team defender. Sure, he does have flaws in his game, but there's a reason he got paid that contract in the first place. The Nets made 2 more trades where they acquired Haywood Highsmith and Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann is the 3-and-D guy, but without the 3 and without the D. But Haywood Highsmith is a 3-and-D guy who can shoot the 3 and can play defense, so that's a decent pickup, although I would probably expect him to be traded around the deadline. But the Nets did bring back Cameron Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, and Zaire Williams. Day'Ron Sharpe is a solid backup center. You keep him around for 2 more years, that's a W. Zaire Williams has potential. He wasn't great last year, but there was something to build on. And Cameron Thomas, one of the more elite young scorers in the NBA, you bring him back for only a 1-year, $6 million deal, a qualifying offer. That's insane. I don't expect him to be on this team after this season. He's definitely walking in free agency next year. But overall, the Nets didn't do anything that I loved, but they didn't do anything that I disliked either. So I think they did mid, which is why they're in mid. The Phoenix Suns, I'm gonna put them in the I guess tier. The Suns got super busy in this offseason, probably the most active team of the summer. Let's just start with the Bradley Beal waiving. This was one of the biggest stories of the offseason. I've already touched on this with the Clippers bit, but yeah, he just wasn't very good for them, and he wasn't a good fit next to D-Book, and they didn't want to pay him that contract for the next 2 years, so you just waive him. But their biggest story was trading NBA superstar Kevin Durant to the Houston Rockets. The Suns got back Dillon Brooks, Jalen Green, and a top 10 pick in the draft. Jalen Green is now the Suns' full-time shooting guard, and now Devin Booker has been moved to point guard. I don't like that. And Dillon Brooks is a solid addition, somebody that can come in and set the culture and play some good defense, something this team is miserable at. They also made a trade for Charlotte Hornets center Mark Williams. Mark Williams has dealt with notable injuries throughout his career, infamously being vetoed from a trade to the Lakers for a back injury. But now he ends up on the Phoenix Suns, a team that did need a center. And if there's any chance Mark Williams wants a big contract next year, he's gonna have to ball for the Suns, and I actually kind of expect him to do so. He's not a good defender, but he's a solid post scorer and a pretty good rebounder. So yeah, the Suns made a bunch of trades, but it feels like they kind of are stuck in the same position as they were before the trades. You're still a team who's aiming to make the play-in at best. That's not great. I did like some of their pickups, but it just wasn't enough. I think the Devin Booker Suns era, as far as competing for championships goes, is pretty much cooked, so I'm gonna give them an I guess. The Portland Trailblazers, I'm gonna have to put them in the question mark tier, to be honest. I don't really know what their plan is. They traded Anthony Simons for Drew Holiday, who still has 3 years remaining on his deal. He's an aging defensive-oriented guard who's no longer that good of a perimeter defender, and he's no longer a good three-point shooter. Or maybe that's a stretch, but he's definitely not the shooter that he was previously. You bring back Damian Lillard on a 3-year deal. That's a huge story for this team. Super cool. But he unfortunately will not play a game of basketball this year. These moves don't make much sense to me because ideally Scoot Henderson, who you drafted number 2 overall, is your prized possession possession. You want him to succeed under all circumstances. So you bring in Damian Lillard, who I doubt is going to be coming off the bench, and Drew Holiday, who, yes, will provide some defense to that backcourt, but paying him $30+ million over the next 3 years when you have guys like Shaedon Sharpe, Donovan Clingan, Toumani Camara to pay is just stupid. I do think their roster is good overall. I think they could use some three-point shooting, but other than that, they're a deep team, and I do expect them to compete as a play-in team in the West. But I do have questions about their moves and what exactly they do for the future of this team. The Utah Jazz, it really sucks to do this, but I have to put them in the question marks. While yes, the Jazz were awarded with Ace Bailey in the draft, they did absolutely nothing to surround him with an even semi-competent roster. And I don't know how this team expects these young players to develop and get better when their environment is losing and being bad. In this offseason, the team added Yusuf Nurkic, Gorgeous Niang, Kevin Love, and Kyle Anderson, and it wouldn't surprise me if half of those guys were bought out. You also lose John Collins, Jordan Clarkson, and Colin Sexton, who were like your best players. So this team is again going to be probably the worst team in the NBA. I think eventually they're going to at least have to try something and give the fans anything to watch, really. The Pelicans, I'm going to give them an I guess. Their biggest move was trading CJ McCollum's expiring contract for Jordan Poole, who still has 2 years left on his deal. They also lost Kelly Olynyk, but got back Sadiq Bey, who could be something for them. And in free agency, this team added Kevon Looney. For a team that struggled with injuries probably more than any other team in the league last year, adding some center depth does make sense, but it doesn't make too much sense when you trade your next year's pick for Derek Queen in the draft, when you already have a starting center in Yves Missi, and of course now Kevon Looney. And pretty much every center on this roster is an awful fit next to Zion Williamson, so that's just great. And now with the extension of Herb Jones, Zion's big contract, the Trey Murphy extension, and you add Jordan Poole, who still has 2 years left on his deal, this is an expensive ass team. And for what? To maybe make the play-in? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows the direction of this team, where they're headed. But at the bottom line, they did add good players. I think for that alone, I'm going to move them up to mid. The team got better for sure, but what exactly is this team trying to accomplish? The Washington Wizards, I'm going to have to place them in I guess. The team did literally nothing to get better around Alex Sarr, and they will again be one of the worst teams in the NBA. I think CJ McCollum could play well for them, but he's likely just a buyout candidate. And they added Cam Whitmore, who maybe could be something. I don't know. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah, the Memphis Grizzlies, I'm going to give them a pretty good offseason, which might shock some people. It's clear the trio of Ja, Bane, and Triple J were never going to win anything significant. So instead of paying all of these guys max money, you trade Desmond Bane and you get 5 first-round picks in return. So I think the Grizzlies are feeling just fine about moving on from Desmond Bane. You bring in KCP in that deal, who can provide some floor spacing and some perimeter defense. You also bring in Ty Jerome, who was one of the better players in the NBA off the bench last year. That's a really good signing for only $9 million a season. They also brought back Jaren Jackson Jr. on a max contract extension for 5 more years, which I think is a good move. Triple J is one of the best defenders in the NBA, and he's only 25 years old. He hasn't even reached his physical prime yet, so that's good to keep him around for the future. And Santi Aldama, who was brought back on a 3-year deal, provided some floor spacing while also being 7 foot tall. He was a good rotation player for them. That's good that they brought him back. But I don't think the team got much worse even after trading Desmond Bane. And you recoup on a ton of assets after that trade. I think the Grizzlies did quite well, so I'm gonna have them in pretty good. As for the Sacramento Kings, Lord help this team in this city. They're going in the question marks, bro. You could have predicted that. The Kings made one trade this offseason, which was moving Jonas Valanciunas for Dario Saric, who is literally unplayable at this point of his career. So you downgrade at backup center. You also bring in Drew Eubanks to the center room, who was one of the worst players in the league last year. But don't worry, guys. They brought in Dennis Schroeder on a 3-year deal. Yeah, this team is cooked. I'm not gonna lie. I expect them to be one of the worst in the Western Conference. They didn't do anything in this offseason to make me feel any better about them. There's also rumors that they're inquiring on Russell Westbrook and might even trade Malik Monk just to open a roster spot for him. If they did that, I would have to make an entire new tier for the Kings. But unfortunately, this team did quite literally nothing I liked in free agency or in the trade market. But that is going to wrap up the video. If you guys did enjoy, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you guys for 1K subs. You guys have been killing it with the support lately. You guys are the GOATs. But I hope to catch you guys in the next video. Until then, I'm out. Deuces.